No idea what all you're doing over there. Very good. Okay, great. So moving on to the pedestrian and bicycle system plan. There's kind of 4 key components: data collection, taking a look at existing conditions, alternatives analysis, and documentation. So the goal, this was discussed with city staff, and then there was a workshop in May that some of you probably attended. I was a virtual participant in that one. But we had this as a draft goal and received some comment on it. Provide safe and convenient pedestrian and bicycle accommodations that connect Navasota neighborhoods to community destinations. The objectives would be to provide off-street facilities that better connect schools, community facilities, and businesses to improve walkability, provide bike route options to better connect neighborhoods to schools, facilities, businesses, through both on-street and off-street trails, and to promote street and intersection design to reduce automobile travel speeds and improve conditions and comfort level for peds and bicyclists. So we went over some of the reasons for this at the last meeting. There's a livability and a community health reasons to promote this type of thing. It's also in the comp plan. So the city's comprehensive plan talks quite a bit about improving conditions for bicycles and pedestrians. And so this plan hopefully provides a framework to do that. There are no definite projects associated with this. I know that there's been a lot of discussion of the grant projects, and those were submitted in June, and there were some modifications made after that May workshop. But this plan is really separate from those specific projects, just so people know. So we started by identifying gaps in the existing system, and looked at connecting community features. So we looked at basically a lot of community amenities, including parks within the city, schools, city services like City Hall here, the medical facilities, clinics, and the fire station and EMS, banks and ATMs, grocery stores and other places that sell food, nursing homes, churches. And so when you look at all of those on the map, and this is overlaid over the existing system. And so the red are the existing sidewalks, and the blue, there's a couple existing trails. And so, right in the heart of the city, along LaSalle and Washington, there's a pretty good pedestrian sidewalk network, but it gets lacking as you start to move away. And so what the plan does is it tries to connect these things up a little bit better and provide good east-west and north-south connectivity. And there's some, there's some options to modify things. I think we're looking for some feedback if people feel like we've got things in the right spot. We did have a draft of this in the May meeting, so we have already gotten some feedback. So we're hoping this is getting close to being the final document, but we're looking for feedback on it tonight. So there is a plot of this on the table in the back. We did look at some typical sections. So a shared use path is typically 10 feet wide with a shoulder of 1 foot on each side. Bicycle boulevards. So a lot of the accommodations are proposed to be bicycle boulevards. These need to be on low volume, low speed streets. And this is a condition where the bikes are allowed to use the full travel lanes, and there's marking and signage to make sure that people are aware of that. And sometimes it's accompanied with traffic calming, but typically you want to put these on streets that are already moving relatively slowly. So we've got a couple different sections for that, whether there's parking on one side or on both sides, and with varying street widths. Along LaSalle Street, that's the type of corridor that should have a marked bike facility and not a shared on-street bike facility. And so we've got a couple options here. One that would narrow the travel lanes from 12 feet to 11 feet to provide a little more space for the bicyclists. Otherwise, there is a pretty decent shoulder out there today. And so you could get a 5-foot lane with a 2-foot buffer. Increasingly, the buffers are recommended to provide a little bit of extra space for the bicyclists when they're on street like this. And then a shared use path on FM 379. If it were to be kept within the existing right of way, likely would want to replace the ditch on one side with storm sewer. So you'd have a curb and gutter and some storm sewer on one side in order to use that ditch space for the new path. So for emergency vehicles, this was a question early on, and it's pretty much standard practice to make these paths suitable for emergency vehicles to use them. They're not built up to a full road standard, but they are strong enough that they're not going to fall apart if a police or fire vehicle needed to use them. So that is recommended for all the paths, that they be sufficient for that. Lighting is a conversation that really needs to happen with any new path. There's pros from a safety standpoint, and just a usability standpoint, a comfort standpoint. But of course, neighbors, there's always concern about new lighting and that sort of thing. The latest fixtures do a pretty good job of reducing that spillover. And so they do tend to keep the light focused on the path. And I've seen in some communities when there's been concerns, they've installed one or two so people can kind of get a feel for them. But it would be a case by case. And again, there are no specific projects proposed as part of this plan, but that would be the next step as the city starts to move forward with the priority corridors. So then we did look at materials, crushed gravel versus asphalt versus concrete. I'll just kind of cut to the chase. There's not a lot of monetary benefit by using the gravel. It's almost as expensive to use asphalt. Concrete is quite a bit more expensive than asphalt, but it probably depends on the path location, how much use it will get, the type of funding that's being used. In general, asphalt's probably a good way to go, and that's what the plan indicates, but there could be cases where concrete would make sense as well. And then the priority routes. So, the routes that we believe would do the most good are kind of shown on here. And there has been some discussion. I think I already heard someone mention it tonight. And, the portion of Washington Avenue right near downtown, that was part of the TAP application. There was talk about on-street bike through there. It did get removed from the grant application. There's still sidewalk improvements proposed, kind of on the west end of that grant application. And, I know that parking is a key issue for folks, and a desire to not lose any parking. And the existing angle parking is not really very well set up for an on-street bike. To have a bike facility behind the angle parking is not a good spot for it. You just can't see when you're pulling out of those stalls. And so I think tonight we've talked internally and probably will remove, maybe the batteries are low on this because I lost my pointer now, but right through downtown, it's currently recommended for on-street bike. I think that's going to come off the map because we do have McAlpine, which is the next one just south. That second arrow that's kind of running left to right. That's a much better candidate for bikes. And so, and there's also a pretty good sidewalk network on Washington Avenue already. And it's hopefully, if the grant is approved, it will be extended west. And so there's going to be a pretty solid backbone for pedestrians through downtown. So that's kind of the latest development on that. I know there's some folks here that are particularly interested in that stretch. So I think that's it. You can skip ahead one slide, maybe, Lupe. I think that's it anyway. So we'll leave this up here. So there's some email addresses there, and we're happy to take comments directly. There's some paper comment sheets that you can fill out tonight. Otherwise, we can take some comments now as well. If people want to come up and either ask questions or just kind of give a statement about things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, come on up. I don't know that I'm the right one to answer all the questions, but.
No, not exactly. Suggestions. Where possible, where you have these trails going through, it would be nice if you could extend a small section, say perpendicular to it, to allow like for kids, this in the parks.
Okay.
For kids who want to make a hopscotch thing with removable chalk. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
As you're walking through, just have some kind of off ramp.
Some extra space.
Extra space for things like that.
Sure.
Or, hopscotch or whatever other sidewalk games, or maybe they just want to draw. The other thing is if you made it a little longer and wider, perhaps the city would approve checkerboard in the parks and get the city would need to purchase some plastic chess pieces, things like that, and perhaps then rent it out for people who want to use it. Maybe that would pay for the periodic repainting you would need of the chessboard.
Sure.
So that would be my suggestions to kind of, it would mean that you would have to lay a little bit more asphalt off to the sides, wherever it makes sense for location and terrain.
Sure.
Okay. And that was it.
I just came tonight because I'm concerned about the pedestrian traffic that I see almost every morning going from Exxon across from Walmart over to McDonald's and Annie's. And because a lot of kids, high school kids walk that way, and it just kind of ends.
Yeah.
There's nothing to get them from under the overpass to high school.
Sure.
They're crosswalking a lot, and that's a heavy traffic area. And then they're having to walk across the field to get to the school and stuff. And I'm thinking even if you could just do something right there in front of the donut shop all the way to the driveway would help a lot.
Okay.
And or if you had permission to make something between Annie's, McDonald's, and into the school.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also the workers at McDonald's, a lot of them bike or walk or whatever. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of a dangerous, I think, place for pedestrians.
Sure.
Thank you.
Another area of emphasis I think needs to be made is the area from Ace Hardware to the cemetery and then across Blackshear over to LaSalle. A lot of people coming from that sector of the city that are walking along Blackshear with the truck route with traffic that doesn't seem to understand the speed limit's 30, 35. And you have a lot of kids. See kids on bikes every once in a while as well. I see that you've got it planned to go just north of Blackshear, it looks like, which would be a good idea. Cuts across a vacant lot. And I think that would be a good idea to get traffic off of Blackshear, pedestrian traffic off of Blackshear. But I think that needs to be kind of a heightened awareness area that needs to be considered along with the high school. I think that's a really good idea as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there's, you know, and you mentioned that there's plenty of sidewalk and walking space on the other side of town, around here, over in, you know, in the church area, and on McAlpine, plus on LaSalle, or on Washington Street itself. But coming across there, a lot of people going over towards Dollar General, going to Berkshire Brothers, and other areas over there, that there's really no place to walk except on the street, and there's no sidewalk on either side of Blackshear. Not really any place to put it because of the culverts and stuff like that. So that's, I think, something needs to be emphasized as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for being here to provide this information to us. One of the things that I think that we looked at past traffic crashes. Are we doing anything to look at the future? So we have a new subdivision going in on North LaSalle and the potential for an additional subdivision on North LaSalle. And I noticed that there is a higher level of crashes on North LaSalle about Boulder Drive. So I'm curious if we have put any thought into what future traffic conditions may look like.
Yeah, good question.
That's a tricky one, you know, it's hard to forecast crashes like that, but of course, knowing knowing you've got growth coming and having accommodations for it in place is a good idea. We did consider where some of the growth areas in the city, I think tried to connect them in the best we could. But if there's some specific, if we want to look at the map and make a few notes, let's do that. Because that's, like I said, it's difficult to forecast the crashes, but there's some things, if you know development is coming, maybe it's a higher priority to get some accommodations in those locations. Yeah, it's data on actual numbers of people walking and biking it's pretty tough to come by. It's getting a little better because everyone carries around a cell phone now and people are taking your data. So there's actually there's pretty reliable data now from, they call it crowdsourced data, but it's basically cell phone data for cars because there are more cars on the road. It's still pretty spotty for pedestrians and bikes. And so we don't have good data on the number of people. The best way to do it is still to send out surveys. We didn't go to that level with this study, but it's also important to remember that even if there's low volumes biking and walking now, it might be because there's not a good place to do it. And so those numbers could change if you get the accommodations in place. But the short answer is we do not have good data on how many people walk and bike right now. It's a good question.
But you're not proposing going down Washington.
Yeah, I think that's a change tonight. I think that in order to do that, you'd probably have to do you'd have to reconfigure the parking most likely.
Oh, downtown.
Yeah, and I think that's been heard pretty loud and clear. That's a major concern.
Very, very detrimental to the downtown.
Yeah.
Okay, so where are you proposing? It's not down Washington.
Well, and we're talking about still proposing it further out on Washington, once you get out of the downtown area. So,
And branching off.
right. Yep, that's right. And then also, I don't know if my pointer's gonna work, but, McAlpine is immediately parallel to Washington Street for a nice long stretch. And that's a lower volume street. That's probably a better place for bikes to be. So we're proposing that would be a bike boulevard and allow bikes on McAlpine itself. Yeah, so these are, and so this is, that center section of that yellow arrow on Washington, kind of goes away as far as bike accommodation is concerned, based on the feedback that we've heard most recently. But that's McAlpine just to the south of it. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of traffic flow and traffic on the railroad track.
So the question is that have things been looked at from a data standpoint on the railroad tracks on 105? You mean as far as the number of crossings or?
On the train.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, trains, unfortunately, railroads, when we were talking about earlier today, are they don't really have to do much of anything they don't want to do, and so it's hard. It's sometimes hard, but I'm not sure if the city has any specific studies going on with rail, with the rail interaction with 105 at the moment. Yeah. We talked about the crossings a lot earlier today in our meeting, and it's challenging. Yeah. So, let's see.
I have a question about the bike boulevards, the definition of it. And it seems to me that that's just the bicycles are sharing the road with the traffic type thing. We're just putting markings on the street. Isn't that what all the streets are at this point? Without the markings. So, I mean, why are we going through designating? We just say that anything that's not anything else is a bike boulevard.
Yeah. I think that's a fair question. Some corridors may be better suited for it than others in terms of speeds and volumes. They're not necessarily all equal that way, the local streets. And it actually is, it's helpful for the bicyclists also just to it's communicated to the drivers that they're expected to be there and they're allowed to be there. So it's just kind of a higher level of
We've
accommodation.
got bike boulevards and special bike boulevards.
Yeah. Right,
And
right.
they're the ones that are marked. Okay.
Yeah, it's, and it's a pretty low cost, improvement to make. But it kind of shows a commitment to hopefully, wanting to encourage people to bike more and, give people a easier way to get around, essentially an alternate way to get around. It's a good question though. You're right. A lot of the local streets are fairly suitable for bikes as it is, but it does kind of give it an extra layer of, priority, I guess. And that's something the city can kind of talk about on a case by case basis. But like McAlpine's a good example, to let people know this is the place to be. If you're biking and you're trying to get downtown and access the businesses, that this is where you ought to be rather than on Washington. So it's a two-way street, communicates to both the bikes and the drivers. Mhm. Yeah. So the comment there is about being careful about mixing bicycle traffic with pedestrian traffic, and you're right. There needs to be some thought behind how that's designed, and providing a designated or delineated space for them that is separate is a good way to do that. Yep. And right downtown, there's a pretty good sidewalk network, but it ends as soon as you get a block or two away, generally. Okay, well, appreciate the feedback. Please do fill out comment forms or feel free to, why don't we go to the email addresses again at the end? And then, let's mark up some things on the maps too. Some of the comments that we've heard tonight, I'd like to get a Sharpie on the map. And if you have any other feedback also on some of the thoroughfare plan, things that we looked at in more depth, happy to hear that too. So appreciate your time tonight. Thanks.